welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I wanted to talk about the 7 different types of brand stories that I actually identified by researching a lot of different brands and their origin stories, and showing how you can also create a compelling story for your brand even if you think you don't have a story to go with it, or a reason why you started your products, or you don't even have a personal connection to the products you sell. Here's an interesting one. Did you know that Instagram was actually called Bourbon before they became like a photo sharing app? And it was actually an app designed for whiskey lovers, because one of the founders, that was his passion, and he wanted to create an app that would allow people to do it. But what they realized, that the main feature of sort of the app they'd created was the photo sharing option, and that became super popular, so they rebranded and pivoted into a new direction and blew up, and yes, exactly, are now this giant company they are today. So why did I tell you that story? So the reason I'm telling you that story is because a lot of times people get stuck on this idea that you need like a specific story that will help you, launch into the stratosphere. But a lot of times businesses sort of figure it out as they go along, and they don't necessarily have a specific brand story that customers can point to or even remember. Having said that, there are some brands that do have stories and do this pretty well. So I'm going to go through 7 different examples for you so you can really understand and get a grasp of the different types of brand stories that sort of exist or can be created. And then hopefully you can apply that to your brand. So let's jump right in. Here we go. Okay, so there's 2 brands which have what I like to call the founder story. Now, the founder story is where the brand itself is very focused on the person who started the brand, who is the face behind the brand. So the first company that does this is Melissa and Doug, who are a extremely famous US-based toy company for kids, where they specifically create a lot of wooden products. And their whole story is that they couldn't find, good, high quality, sort of classic toys for their children. And so obviously, what did they do? They went and created it themselves. And then they became the face of their brand, and they called their brand Melissa and Doug. So we see that their entire brand story is focused on those founders, which is super interesting, because a lot of times there are people who are selling products online and they do not want to be the face of the brand. They have no interest in being associated with their brand in any way, shape, or form, which is totally fine. Not every brand needs to be Melissa and Doug. That's just one example. Another example is actually of a brand story that's focused on the founder, is a brand called Fjällräven, which are I think they are Swedish. Yes, they are Swedish, a Swedish company. And they make all kinds of bags, which are actually very popular in Israel for some reason, where I live. And you see people walking around with them. Now, the story of his brand is that the guy who made it, his name is, I can't even pronounce his name, I'm sorry. If I knew Swedish and I knew how to pronounce the alphabet, I would tell you his name. But if his name is Ake, I don't know how you say his name, I'm sorry. So anyway, Fjällräven, they were created because the founder discovered that Swedish school children were going to school wearing very uncomfortable backpacks. And he wanted to change that. And he wanted to create something that was sturdy, that was durable, that would last a long time. And he also combined that with his love for the outdoors. So if you go on their website, you can actually read about the founder's history. So another great story about how somebody identified a problem, he then created a solution, and he is associated with the brand, although the brand is not named after him in any way, but you do see that he is mentioned in a lot of the content and stuff like that on the website. So that is 2 stories. Okay, moving on. We have another type of brand story, which I like to call the product focused brand story. And now this one is great, because this one actually can be done by many, many brands, because when you have created something special, when you invent something, when you have a product that has something really, really unique, you can then create your entire brand narrative around this story. One of the brands that does this really well is Genius Juice, which I actually mentioned in a previous video, which you can check out, about positioning your brand against an enemy. But Genius Juice are very focused on calling out what makes their products so great. And that is a great way to position, because they have one ingredient, which is coconut. And it's amazing. And they really highlight that, and they focus on that as part of their story, and showing how sustainable they are, and there's zero waste, and there's no chemicals. Yeah, it's a very refreshing approach. So you can definitely do that for your brand. Another brand that I recently discovered is called Fable Yoga. I actually do yoga once a week, and maybe I should buy a mat from them because they look like they have great mats. And their story is really what's called the customer narrative, and that is also sort of similar to the hero's journey, where you are basically not projecting any sort of story about yourself. You're not telling a story about your products. You are telling a story about the customer, and you're inviting them into your brand narrative, and you're showing them how they sort of really improve the customer's life through yoga and help them achieve greatness, etc. So yeah, it's all about having fun and feeling confident in their yoga journey. So yeah, namaste. Anyways, moving along to the next story. So the next story that I like to that I've sort of identified is from Lego. So I was looking at Lego and I was looking at what they do and I was looking at their website and everything. And there is no specific person that I could point to. There was no specific story that they focused on about their products, but what there was a very big focus on their brand values. And another brand that does this really well is, apart from Lego, is also Crayola. And Crayola are very focused on their brand values, which is really bringing inspiration and innovation, like allowing children to express their creativity, etc. And you see that come out in all the content that they put out on Instagram, on their website, and many other things. And again, Lego is hyper focused on helping kids learn and develop these skills and become sort of mini engineers, which is awesome. So it's a very compelling brand story narrative. And now, really fun, we're up to number 5, by the way, is the purely entertainment story. And there are brands that literally are just exist to entertain you as a customer, to make you laugh, and then once you're laughing and enjoying and you feel connected to the brand. So injecting humor into your brand story is super fun. And so two companies, I have like 2 examples for every brand story. So 2 companies that do this really well is, one is Anatomicals, a UK based sort of soap and body wash and toiletries company, and their tagline is "We only want you for your body," which I think is hilarious. And if you look at all their packaging, they just have like the most hilarious slogans. Yeah, some of them quite sort of adult, I would say, but really funny. And another one is Whiskey River Soap, and they have this crazy brand story if you go on their website, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, but you can read that later. It will make you laugh, I promise you. If you're having a bad day, just go read Whiskey River Soap or go read Anatomical's copywriting and you will be laughing your head off. Okay, number 6. So this story is something that is kind of boring, but I found it on the Crocs website. So this is a corporate story, that's what I like to call it, because it doesn't really show any sort of personal connection to the customer. But what Crocs does on their website is they just kind of talk about how it's just a lot of numbers on their like About Us page, very corporate, sort of showing how far they've come and how they've impacted their industry, etc. It's not that compelling. Their original brand story is kind of how it was founded by a group of friends who liked fishing and they wanted to make a better fishing/boat shoe, and then they invented Crocs. But nobody even knows that story. They just buy Crocs because they're really ugly, but they seem to really work and they seem to last forever, which is, my husband has a pair, I don't know. I think he's had them since before we were married, which is a pretty long time. And now we have another brand story that I have identified, which is the Heritage story. I like to call it the Heritage. Sounds very luxurious and proper and classic, I guess you could say, which is interesting because I found a company that does focus on their heritage, which is Innocent Drinks, another really entertaining company in the UK. But if you actually go on their website and you want to find their brand story or sort of their About Us, you will see a timeline and you will see the history of how they have done everything, starting from having a stand in like a outdoor festival. They were making smoothies, and how they are this massive smoothie company today. So those are the 7 brand stories I've identified. I will run through them one more time just so you remember and sum up. Let's see if I can do this. So number 1 was the founder story, which focuses on the person who started the brand. Number 2 was the product focused story, which really romances the way the product works, the ingredients in them, or something very special about them. Number 3 was the customer narrative story, which I really like because it works for brands who don't necessarily have a better product or a specific story of why they started, but it does focus on how they help their customers' lives improve. The value story, which really is awesome because that type of story can then be injected into all the content that the brand puts out when they really focus on what their core values are as a brand. Then there was the purely entertainment story where the brand is merely there to make people laugh and entertain them and make them happy. I like that. Number 6 was the Crocs sort of story, which was the corporate details about how a brand has been around for a long time and how much of an impact they have and maybe how many employees they have. Who knows? Anyway, so you can definitely put a corporate page on your website if that is suitable for your brand. And then there is finally what I've discovered is the heritage story, which focuses on the history of the company and how far they've come. And it's really awesome because you feel connected to a brand that shows, we were just these little guys when we first started and now look where we are today. It's quite inspiring. So the moral of the story is that there are many different ways to tell stories. There are many different narratives that you can create that will bring customers into your brand. There is not one way of sort of telling a story that you have to follow the specific hero's journey or anything like that. Sometimes it just organically happens. Like as your brand grows, you'll discover a story within the growth of your company. So keep digging. Don't be afraid to get creative. Don't be afraid to explore all kinds of different ideas. And yeah, so happy storytelling. And I will be back with more videos on building a brand narrative, because I like to talk about sort of the brand story in a bigger way, which I like to call the narrative, because the narrative really addresses every sort of touch point in your brand as opposed to just having like a static brand story on your website. But we will talk about that in another video. So that's all for now, and thanks for listening. If you have any insights or comments, or you want to tell me your brand story, feel free to put it in the comments below. Bye for now.